Good evening, everyone. Hi, nice to see you. Here we are on Toward a Quality of Life once again. And we're here in the month of July, the year 2000. Excuse me, please. And we're going to continue and finish up with something I started in the last time I was talking to you, a piece called Energy Fundamentals in the Human Interest. In that session, I described very grossly some of the workings of the oil industry, the energy industry, the oil industry in particular, and wrapped that around the theme that currently the people who sit in the administration in the White House are very interested and eager to promote a policy whereby incentives and kinds of subsidies will be given to this very big and powerful industry on the basis that there is an energy crisis, so to speak, and that we must help, which is a very funny word to use with these conglomerates, that we must help them to develop more sources of energy, in particular oil. And my answer and response and reaction to that was more or less what a travesty on two counts. One, the basic count being that the oil industry, oil companies are so affluent, rich, wealthy, able, and completely in control of what they are doing all together with each other, that they hardly need any kind of support whatsoever, incentives, and that if true market practices are what in fact is in effect, there is absolutely no need to be trying to help. It's a travesty. It's a contradiction in terms. It's a very ill-founded concept, to be sure. It's the irony of ironies that the most well-heeled, the most able, the most well-situated to go about its business and produce and do what it's supposed to do would have to be getting any kind of help and incentive. And the second aspect of why it is a travesty to even consider such a so-called policy is that this comes from persons who sit in the White House who have themselves eschewed and been part of a group and a party, for the most part, that has eschewed that people need less help, in fact, in general. In other words, the government has to give less help, has to be less involved, that services and programs should be cut, that a lot of spending that we do is unnecessary, and that the government should be lean and clean as possible, that the Constitution should prevail, so to speak, and that the government should be out of the business of promoting anyone, anywhere, anytime, social welfare or otherwise. Corporate welfare would have to be the natural corollary of that, corporate welfare or otherwise. So that's the second way that it's a travesty to even hear that such a matter is being shaped into what's supposed to become a supposed policy. Now, we begin here with the fact that the Vice President has reportedly many secret meetings. They're called secret meetings. I'm not calling them that. They've not been open to the press. They've not been available to the public. The content of them, maybe even the people who are in those meetings, I don't know. But some kind of behind closed doors, clandestine meetings, the nature of which we're supposed to hear about later, you know, maybe with a pat on the head, that all is well and good, and we'll be told what went on. And of course, this is reminiscent of when the previous First Lady had her secret meetings on the matter of national health care and was stoned out of existence for those meetings and the fact that they weren't public. But in this case, the secret meetings have gone on. They reportedly are about the so-called energy crisis and energy matters and ways of proceeding to convince people, at least in part of what they're all about, to convince people that we need to get more energy and we need to open up regulated areas that are now barred from getting explored, that we need to open up domestic regulated areas to further exploration. Of course, the famous one being ANWAR, the Alaskan National Wildlife Refugee Area. So, supposedly, the bandwagon and the choo-choo train is going to start rolling with the Vice President in control, going to town meetings fairly soon, talking to people, trying to convince them after these secret meetings, to which we were not privy to hear all the kinds of discussion that went on, to try to tell people that we have an energy crisis. We don't have an energy crisis when you understand, especially if you saw the first part. Each of my shows is about an hour in length, and unfortunately I can't go through what I've discussed already, but there is not, first of all, an energy crisis whatsoever. The crisis lies more with corporations and how they go about their business, the control of oil, the virtual manipulation of markets, and many other factors that have nothing to do with sort of a laissez-faire policy that would make the price of oil more flexibly go up and down according to circumstances. There is not a crisis. There is plenty of oil, lots of oil the world over. Some of the oil that we produce is shipped to another country, at least one other country, if not more. And there's enough oil to last us for at least 100, maybe 200, maybe 300 years. There are many billions of barrels of oil. There's what I last read, there's about 4 times as much oil still in the ground known to exist that can be extracted according to current technology, which can extract more and find more these days, as there was extracted in the last 100 years. There's still 4 times as much as that. So in a practical sense, for today's world, today's economy, and today's life, there's an indefinite amount of oil for us into the future. Of course, that doesn't talk about, are we just going to exploit the earth to hell while we don't use other sources of energy or curtail our use of energy, instead of just lazily leaning on exploiting oil, so-called resources. Now, but more of that later. I'd like to point out, I usually don't like to talk in terms of statistics. Statistics it's not so much that they are misleading, which they can be. It is a true science. They are used misleadingly a lot, and they are used out of context, and they also are used in lieu of thinking and synthesizing all the things we need to put together to understand anything that we talk about. But I'll just give you a little bit right here to give you an idea of how grossly wrong it is for us to even mouth the idea that we would be considering incentives or help to the oil industry, the all-powerful oil industry, the same oil industry when Valdez happened that was not quick to come to the rescue when the government said, you come to the rescue right now. That industry waited and waited, and hours elapsed before it marshaled resources to come and help in its own good time, showing you who's really in control of whom. But statistically, tens of billions of dollars have already been given in tax credits to the oil industry over the past 5 years. Tens of billions of dollars in the past 5 years have already been given in tax credits. Now, 15 billion in tax breaks and incentives more is planned with this new policy to be given over the next 5 years. 15 billion more in tax breaks and incentives to the oil industry over the next 5 years. And I also heard something pass by me too about some bill that's either proposed or signed already that suspends companies paying royalties on lands that they are drilling. I can't remember in what context. I just heard that yesterday or so. Now, the person in charge of these secret meetings and the bandwagon that's going to try to persuade the public to go along with the idea that we have a crisis and we need to desecrate our land and country even further in the name of energy, was formerly, I believe, the CEO of Halliburton, which is an oil well service and construction company. In other words, a very well-known and mighty company in the oil business itself. And I believe that the CEO, who is now serving as the vice president, received a multi-million-dollar severance pay when he left the company before he took the position that he has now. So that shows you, and of course we all know about the legacy of the Bush family and their entrenchment in the oil industry. It's well said all over television and in commentators that you can hear from. You also have companies like Enron and Global Marine Drillers, and Enron is an exploration and production company whom you should be getting yourself acquainted with in addition to the major big oil companies themselves, such as Texaco and ExxonMobil, Dutch Shell, and so on, all of them having, of course, a very serious interest in more opportunities to grab more of the oil market, explore more areas that are not being explored now, and just control the resources and make more money and continue to, which is not to fault them. They are corporations after all, and that is the name of the game. And it's also, if that's the business, it's predicated on more oil, more selling of oil, more driving towards producing and using of oil as part of the business they are part and parcel of. Now, if you want to know what's going on with gasoline, of course the prices have steadied somewhat right now. If you want to know what's going on with gas prices, heating oil prices in general, as they had recently risen, for example, in the recent past, you shouldn't go to the government and say, Uncle Sam, help me to understand this or do something about it. Where you should really look is the corporations. They're the ones that know what's going on. They're the ones that are in control. They're the ones who effectively are a cartel, not only the oil owners of the lands that have the oil, and also partners with the oil conglomerates, but the oil conglomerates themselves are the ones who have the control over what happens to the market. How much is pumped, how much is shipped, how much is held back, how much is refined, which price is gotten where. And there has been so much merging that the elasticity of the market, the ability of the market to respond within itself competitively is much reduced and much more of a fixed kind of situation, such that you actually have a kind of price fixing potential situation or concerns, of which there are very few worldwide, that dominate and dictate how things are going to proceed. So when you look to what's going on, don't look to the government for the explanation, look to the corporations for the explanation, who they are, how much they own, and how they control how they control the markets. And when you look for relief, don't look for the government and don't look to drill more. Look for relief from the government to demonopolize the control of the energy resources. We've got to look to the government for much more than that, but as far as energy is concerned, one would look to a demonopolization rather than saying, help me get these energy prices down, drill more, help these mega corporations who are in complete control in the driver's seat, rather than help them to further advance their very dominant and total control position. Now, again, just a couple of statistics to bring home the point. The profit on average for the 10 top refiners of oil between 1999 and 2000 doubled. The profit on average for the 10 top companies that refine the oil doubled on average between 99 and 2000. In the first quarter of 2001, the profits of these refiners increased on average 81% in the first quarter of this year. So again, back to the travesty that the government should even be trying to help this dominant controlling enterprise that owns the energy supply that we typically use and want to use more of, as we're being persuaded and effectively brainwashed into pursuing things as they are and believing that that's how things have to be without really thinking about it. Now, back to the other part, too, that I mentioned, the travesty of the government being ideologically of the position that it should not be involved in most matters, including those of enterprise or people's lives or welfare, whatever kind it is. You wouldn't see the government of this ideological persuasion want to interfere with HMOs, for example, because we're told that that's anti-market. You don't want them, they don't want to be advocating things, they say, that would help trial lawyers. In fact, they want to diminish the so-called ability of trial lawyers against corporations. They don't want to interfere there. They don't want to get a national health care. They wouldn't want to interfere there. They don't want to mandate health care for everyone. They don't want to even mandate potentially all of the Social Security funds to be returned to people in the manner in which they are returned now. They don't want, they've turned back the regulation that prohibited snowmobiles from zooming around national parks because they don't want to interfere. They don't want to give a lot of extra money to the Environmental Protection Agency so that it can clean up the outstanding many toxic waste dumps and sites and nuclear waste areas that fester in the country. They don't want to add money to that. They don't want to add money to make the EPA a more forceful and enforcing agency, because that would contradict sort of a live and let live and leave people alone kind of policy. It also, of course, would inhibit a lot of the practices that especially corporations and larger concerns engage in. So why, one would have to ask, or how inappropriate it is to say we have to step in and help oil companies. A very curious twist that kind of speaks for itself. Now, when a government helps people, and maybe it shouldn't, when it helps people in sort of welfare programs such as Medicare, Social Security, child care, medical leave, all this kind of thing. When it helps, ergonomics, civil rights, disabled rights, workplace situations, when it helps with this, it could be termed a socialist government, and there's a lot of criticism of socialism in this country. And I'm just throwing out the question, what do you call a government that helps business and helps corporations? What kind of ism is that? That's what I wanted to know what that is. Is that really just capitalism? Or I don't think so, because that's not what capitalism is all about. We have to figure out a term for when the government helps business and corporations. And if helping business is supposed to then help people, sort of the trickle-down theory, what kind of ism is that you help people through helping business? So we have to figure out what those terms ought to be to describe corporate welfare. Now, as I mentioned, there's quite a bit of oil. There's an indefinite amount of oil as far as strict amounts of oil to be extracted go around the world. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of other things that come out of oil that we have to consider when we're thinking of this energy. It's not just the superficial or the veneer of the price of gas. We have to look behind that. We also have to look at what this kind of energy is doing to us to begin with. And we have to look at, for example, things that energy does, like, and I talked about this in the previous session, ruin the air and ruin our lungs. And also, how about petroleum, as it's involved in the manufacture of plastics and all kind of petroleum synthetic chemicals and materials, all of which are suffocating the planet as well. Some in a literal sense, like when the plastics that contain beer cans get around the wildlife's necks and choke them to death, but also in the manufacturing process, in what goes into the water, what goes into the air, and also in the fact that plastics aren't good for us. Plastics aren't good against our skin. Plastics aren't good against our foods. Plastics are not really biologically fit for biological matter. And it's interesting that now the plastic manufacturers have band together to create an ad, or their association, I guess, has created an ad with the theme that plastics make it possible, trying to play up how great plastics are for us, like bottles that don't break, when in fact we should be going back to glass bottles, when in fact we should be going back to everybody bringing his or her own bottles and containers when we go to get our foods and filling them up. We should not be having all this garbage and carcinogenic and antithetical materials that don't work with biology, filling up the earth and making the earth a more hazardous and unhealthy place to live. Your liver doesn't like plastic. Now, also, what about the incentives? If you're going to go out and give incentives, which we're questioning, should those be given? What about the incentives to alternate energy sources or resources? We all know what they are: solar power, geothermal. I don't know how good that is, windmills, and so on. Yes, there are some incentives, but nowhere near enough to bring those researches and businesses or developments up to snuff or on par with, for example, the oil industry, which is, again, so financially concentrated and able and powerful in effect. And once again, I have to say over and over again, hardly needs anything else to help it on its way except an examination of whether the very monopoly is the cause of the problem, and whether we need all this energy from petroleum, dastardly sources of energy at all. Now, it's very curious to me, but I mean, I understand we all walk our different pathways in life. We have different personalities, different ideas, to be sure, but it's very interesting how some persons don't see that there is an environmental problem. To those who do, it seems rather awkward that it seems so obvious and evident. I'm sitting on the expressway in bumper-to-bumper traffic, something I definitely avoid as much as I can, but it happens, and here it is, a hot day, and the sky is all like a cloudy, polluted color, no clearness to it, all polluted, and all the cars running, and the heat is too high, and a talk show is on the radio that I'm listening to, and someone calls in and says, "What jerks! How did these crazy nuts that talk about the environment?" And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, just look at that as you sit in these polluted skies above, all smeared with all the problems, no nice blue sky with the clouds, and all this exhaust, and all these people bumper to bumper, and somebody saying, what the heck's wrong with these people, these radicals, these nuts that are talking about the environment so much. It's pretty unusual to some that others could not see how much the environment is suffering and how erratic. Like there are periods recently and always where you'll have 9 days of clouds, and then you'll get a sunny day like it's a bonus. The weatherman will joke, guess what, you're going to get a sunny day. Well, never before did that kind of thing happen. You have, like a couple of days ago, the morning's very nice, you go out, oh, it's very cold. Then you, an hour later, oh, it's very nice. Gee, it's curious what's going on with the environment. Hard to notice. Not hard to notice at all. Sick whales, sick dolphins, sick seals, thousands dying altogether, sick fish, thousands dying altogether, diseased from the ocean. I even heard, which I've thought about anyway, I heard someone talking that birds are dying at an alarming rate. And of course, they're drinking the water with the oil and other car materials in it on the roadside, and they're breathing the air. And when I go somewhere where I see a lot of smoke going into the air from manufacturing, or I see a horrible fire, of which there are so many, and the chemicals burn and the smoke is thick, I think of, what about the birds? What about the birds that are in the immediate vicinity that have to breathe this kind of air because their lungs are so little by comparison, and they can take so many fewer parts per million than I can take. I'm just dying more slowly from all these things. But I did hear now someone is collecting the information that the birds are dying. Frogs that are deformed, you've probably seen that on television, and I guess they're getting wiped out too. Great percentages of frogs are getting wiped out, cannot survive. You know, so it's like, wow, gee, I wonder how you can figure out if there's something wrong with the environment. A lot of the trees burned from acid rain. The water's kind of dirty, a lot of bacteria in it. Fish can't swim, yeah. Well, that's why, geez, whoa, if I really think about it, if I go to the country, the air smells so much fresher if I'm in the trees. But gee, I didn't notice how the air's so polluted and stale in the city. Yeah, well, I just can't seem to see it. It must be good to breathe carbon monoxide. It must be good to have all that stuff. Buses go by and oil-burning engines go by, and boy, you can get that stuff when you're on the highways. From the left, from the right, how many things we're breathing. How about the chemicals we use indoors that just fill the area? Some of these polyurethane and other kinds of petroleum-based chemicals that are so very toxic, and then where do they get flushed to? And on and on. We won't go into it here. So it should be obvious that the environment is in dire straits, and it's mathematical. 1 + 1 is 2, this much today, more tomorrow, right here, right in China, right in Russia, right in Argentina, everybody manufacturing, everybody throwing away, everybody burning, everybody drilling, and 1 + 1 is 2 + 2 is 4, etc., etc. It's a mathematical surety, and it can be seen. In fact, the ozone layer has been seen to be depleted at the pole, period. And when we burn all this energy, A, we rape the earth, B, we burn the energy, which causes problems to us and to the air and to the environment. And then we also, in the process of burning the energy, burn a lot of other things that go into the air, which are so unhealthy. So unhealthy. You know, I forgot to mention, too, another startling, of which there have been so many events, a startling event that should sort of instill us with the fear of God. The recent Hurricane Allison that left so much flooding for days and days in Texas, where people described dogs crying because they were exhausted from swimming, trying to have people take them, or snakes and lizards trying to get into their house because everything was so flooded. And people lived through that. Or I think of when cattle were flooded and or cattle were starving and drowning and starving and freezing. All these things, there are so many, they just keep going by. Or when towns are made into matchsticks on a daily basis, which the frequency of which never happened before. As far as it clicking that, oh my goodness, you know, and the floodwaters, the rains, they just kept coming and coming and coming day after day after day. And then from Allison, the days and days and days went by, and it kept heading east slowly, and everybody got hit with something significant. Again, 1 + 1 is 2, and 2 + 2 is 4. Anybody care to remember Noah's Ark? So, it's really too bad if persons cannot see that the environment is suffering, and that our health is suffering, and that nature is suffering. And also, more basically probably to realize, as I hear Native Americans talk about, that nature is sacred, that it's your life source from a practical point of view, but even beyond that, philosophically and morally, nature and trees and the earth and all its riches, beautiful soil, unaltered soil without wood chips on it that suffocates it, stinky wood chips, earthworm-turned soil, unpesticided flowers and grass. Think of all the poisons being sprayed on lawns, and birds go and then peck at that and talk about birds dying. But that nature is sacred, that there's no higher reality and truth than life itself. Life, if you care about life. If you care about life. I would think it would have to fit ideologically with people who are pro-life. If you care about life, you would care that life is not cancered, that life is not cankered, that life is preserved in its richness and beauty and smell and gorgeousness and greatness and awesomeness. Also, people aren't easily able to think forward. We're blind and ignorant, not just in general. I am, you are, we all are. We tend to go with what we know. It takes real calamity, repeated calamity, where we're forced over the edge, forced to change our ways. We don't really think proactively. We think by hindsight. We don't know the future. We can't deduct from what we see in front of us and project, well, gee, if it's like this now, and it's already too bad, just the way it is now, but every year, every month, hey. And we're kind of also resistant to change as human beings. And we're certainly resistant in the ways and means we make our money and the way the economy is formed. And we're certainly resistant in the ways we're so used to luxury and sort of commercial modernity. We could still be as comfortable and cool without a lot of these technological niceties, if you will, but we have to see it. And we're kind of blind and ignorant, I guess, right now. Now, some countries of the world are thinking of suing the United States in world courts, and these kinds of things may come to pass no matter how much we think we can stand alone, as again is another philosophy that's being proselytized out of the center of our government, that we can stand alone and other people should, I quote, get used to it. People like Europe and so on. That we'll take stands on our own. Well, it doesn't work that way. There is a whole big world out there, and the chickens will come home to roost. And eventually, the clock will come full circle, and before anything would get to that point, we ought to be able to take the lead and be the progressive persons that can show the way of how to manage life and what we have here. When the environment is messed up, we all suffer and we all get sick from it, and it all just makes life kind of icky and a drag, among other things that makes life icky and a drag in this day and age. But countries where weather is extreme to begin with, where they have a huge rainy season and then a super dry season, or a very hot season that just comes in very radically, relatively speaking, those countries get hit the first and the hardest when the environment goes down the drain. So countries like Bangladesh and countries on the African continent, and that's just so painful that a country in Africa would have to suffer worse drought, that the rains won't come, or the rains won't come on time, and everything. It's not like in this country where you can turn on a faucet, or where year-round you have some water, some sun. If everything doesn't come exactly then, life dies, life suffers. And that just tears your guts out to see that because of what we're doing, ruining the environment, places would not see the rain. That's mortal sin. That's venial sin. That's so horrible, that's unspeakable, that humans could cause this kind of tragedy. In Mongolia, in the last winter that passed, a huge, way over half, I forgot what percent, of their livestock died because Mongolia, again being an extreme place, has extreme cold, but the environment is messed up, and they had extremer cold and virtually wiped out their livestock. The countries that live at the extreme get hit hardest and first. And it doesn't even matter that they are also the most vulnerable, which it does. But what matters most is the desecration of life. The United States is, we all know, the highest per capita user of resources and polluter of the earth, because we run air conditioners, vehicles, we all have vehicles, and we throw away a lot of garbage and styrofoam and paper cups, and on it goes. Boy, the packaging that businesses use, such elaborate packaging, we all take, somebody's got to manufacture that and use resources and pollute the earth. We take that stuff, we just throw it away. Everybody dumps it away. Now, what we could also do, on the other hand, with energy, besides alternate, besides just making sure that energy is truly working as a laissez-faire market phenomenon. The other thing we could do, of course, which is what I've been getting to all along here as well, is conserve Period. Conserve. Stop using so much energy. Excuse me. I was surprised to find out that a very significant percentage of the electricity we use in the country is from computers. They're eating up a ton of electricity, a ton of energy. And as someone pointed out to me in an email, those computers are probably on way beyond what they should be, taking up the energy. And I mentioned before buildings being built that have to suck, that have to use air conditioning to heat glass enclosed structures that heat up, to air conditioning to cool glass enclosed structures that heat up very significantly in the sun. Silly way to be building things where for sure the energy demands of the building are going to be tremendous and much greater than if you built sensibly and had natural ventilation and your buildings were built around some kind of design that would not have to use so much energy, to say the least of having natural airflow in a building rather than air-conditioned airflow. Trees, the need for trees, never cut down trees. We need more trees. And think of parking lots, how your car heats up and how everything sits in the sun and gets baked, and even the buildings that are out there without trees, how much trees would help in conservation. Trees would help in the quality of air. Trees would help in life being more lifelike. Trees would help to be homes for birds. Trees would help, trees would help. Trees would help for our eyes, give us visual rest, visual relaxation. The color green is a great color for the human psyche. It's a restful color. It's a peaceful color. I remember Bill Cosby said once, you know, I guess the rooms you sit in before you go on television are painted green, and someone questioned why they're painted green, and I guess the idea is green is a very relaxing color, but Bill Cosby said they're painted green because they mean money, which I thought was cute. Lights on, the way we leave lights on, you can see the Prudential and the Hancock lit up completely after basically all the people are gone. The system is that all the lights stay on for hours and hours. Times Square, Nevada, Las Vegas. Oh boy, now. Talk about where an administration should come in with some policy. The use of water, taking water away from that area, to have all that splashy water stuff going on, and to have water in the hotels and swimming pools and so on. And the lights, the energy consumption to have all those lights where it's not even natural out in the desert. So erroneous, so ill-considered. Miles per gallon on vehicles. We already have the technology to get much greater amount of miles per gallon. We already have it. We're just not using it. It doesn't consume as much energy, I would guess. It doesn't meet the needs of consortiums that dominate the energy picture. National transportation, instead of one person, one vehicle. One person, one very big consuming vehicle. Planning, using our intelligence, thinking for now, thinking for always, thinking for better ways to live. National transportation, which I mentioned before in the previous session, quick, clean, nicely tailored national transportation that's humane and respectful of humans. That could get us everywhere and save tons of energy. Conservation, we all know, it's everywhere. The amounts that could be saved make up more than half of what we're consuming if we were to pay attention to not just using energy wantonly and using energy in ways that are not sensible to begin with. Now, the current administration wants to drill in ANWAR, which is the travesty of travesties. Everybody says, oh, it's so many acres, I think in the million range. It's up in the millions. It's very vast. And that the area that the drilling would take place in is about 2,000 acres or something. But the point being, once again, I'm restating, is that the wildness, the animals that live there, has to remain exactly that, wild, unperturbed, unaffected whatsoever by the touch of human industry. And the minute you do go in and disturb, essentially, an area, it is forever altered. It cannot be the way it was before. And these are areas and kinds of creatures that need huge expanses that cannot be put upon to the slightest degree, or else will have some kind of altered life because of it, cannot be put upon by humans making their way into an area, into a habitat, into what is called wild. If it's wild, it has to be wild. So it's out of the question, and there is no need for it. Even if there were a need for it, even if it made economic sense, which many people point out it does not, because it hasn't got that much to yield to begin with. Be that as it may, all the other factors that more energy is not what we need. The question should be, why are we even using so much energy? Alternate forms of energy, and questions about the practices of how we go about our energy and who owns it and how it's controlled and how it's used by people and accepted without thought. All these matters have to be considered. And ANWAR is out of the question, and it's so important. We already had so much destruction up in Alaska, and we certainly had that epic and watershed event known as Valdez. Leave life alone. Hands off. Paws off. Leave life alone. No more disturbance. Enough is enough. Your appetite is too voracious. You just don't go doing everything you want, laying waste to what is natural, pure, and wholesome and good. And so far, apparently, the Congress has voted down further exploration on the Gulf Coast recently, I believe I heard. So far, it's been, the ruling has been favorable to not going namby-pamby and grabbing oil from anywhere with our voracious appetites and lack of shame, if you will, lack of reflection, lack of self-awareness, lack of knowing better or trying to figure things out better. So, in closing, I would say be very careful on the lookout for these town meetings that are supposed to be coming your way, led by a member of the administration, to try to persuade and convince that we have an energy crisis and we need to get more energy, nuclear energy, oil energy, fossil fuel energy. Think more deeply, and those of you, and there are many, many, think more deeply about poor Mother Earth, your lungs, your health, your children's health, all the people in hospitals with unhealth. Why are they so unhealthy? And why do these kinds of diseases that make their cells go awry afflict them? The weather patterns. Just think, what's in your water? All the chemicals going from garages and that are used in automobiles. Where does all that stuff flow? All the incinerators, all the smoke. Look, open your eyes, open your ears, and first consider that you are of this earth. You are born out of it, you die into it. You are of the earth, you are the soil itself. You are one with the earth, the organic living earth. You're a cellular part of this life. And our whole task should be to affirm life, advance life, protect life, pro-life. Our whole force should be for life in its glory and beauty, not for disease, not for deterioration, not for acid rain, not for destruction, not for spoiling, not for wanton devastation, not for gluttony, not for just going around doing whatever we want, polluting, knocking down, killing, smearing, smudging, spoiling. And when you hear about energy crisis, when you hear about energy policy, when you hear that the government should help the controlling forces of energy, if it weren't so sad, it could be such a terribly laughable joke. Always remember a saying I think about, that the snark was a bojum. In other words, what looks like one thing is really something else. And let's use our intelligence to know better, and let's use our intelligence to have clean and beautiful life. Thank you, and see you again.
Lay it down.